The following program is an original production of WICC PBS Chicago.
The slow motion recovery. Why are real estate values still going down in so many parts of the Chicago area, sparking fears of even more foreclosures? The epic Star Wars battle on Chicago's lakefront. Will Mayor Emanuel's latest maneuver save the proposed George Lucas Museum? And it's all about respect. How one encounter between a white cop and a black motorist on an Indiana highway led to a teaching moment. Tonight, these stories and much more on In the Loop. Good evening. I'm Chris Bury. Robin Robinson will join us later in the program. For many Chicago area homeowners, the Great Recession of 2008 never really ended. Yes, several neighborhoods along the lakefront and west of the Loop have seen jumps in home prices, but in the south suburbs, those values have never recovered. In some places, such as South Suburban Harvey, they are actually getting worse.
We're at 147th and Cooper. Here in Harvey, Illinois, and what we're seeing is an area where there are vacant properties. There have been properties that have literally been abandoned by the investors and boarded up.
Robert Sanders, who grew up on Chicago's South Side, is now a supervising counselor at the South Suburban Housing Center. The agency helps homeowners who are at risk of losing their properties. Sanders says the housing crash of 2008 has had a lasting impact on communities such as Harvey.
It saddens me. When I came up as a child, this was the place where we like to come to Dixie Square Mall and other areas. Now, you don't want to come to Harvey because all of these things are gone.
What was once a stable, blue-collar suburb is now plagued with boarded-up homes, abandoned as a result of the foreclosure crisis. Census data show Harvey has one of the area's highest rates of vacant structures, 1 in 4 residences.
It's been a severe impact in this area of Harvey. Harvey in general has taken between 2005 and 2015 an 80% decline in housing value.
Harvey is one of 37 south suburbs where property values are still below where they were in 2005. In communities such as Calumet City, Blue Island, and Stager, the average price for homes and condominiums remains more than 50% below where they were a decade ago. And in Markham, the town neighboring Harvey, the average home price has fallen 68%. Research from the Institute for Housing Studies at DePaul University shows Cook County's top 10 towns for foreclosures are all in the south suburbs. Jeff Smith, the Institute's executive director, says these communities are still struggling to recover, in part because of high concentration of subprime mortgages. Those loans were issued to people with poor credit ratings.
These are, typically communities of color on the south side of the city, the west side of the city, South Suburban Cook County, West Suburban Cook County. Those are areas that have, again, really saw high concentrations of subprime lending activity, have seen long-term high levels of foreclosure activity. And these are areas where the impact of that foreclosure activity is still very, very apparent, and they have not recovered.
To help these homeowners facing foreclosure, the federal government authorized $46 billion for loan modifications and loan refinancing programs. But the Inspector General's office shows for borrowers who sought mortgage relief, the default rate is still nearly 53%. Dennis Rodkin, the residential real estate reporter for Crain's Chicago, says that for many homeowners, it has been a lost decade.
A lot of people who had a loan modification then fell back into it because, again, our values didn't rise, so it was still a struggle to pay, and the house wasn't recovered, the value of the house wasn't recovering. So loan modifications helped individual homeowners in many cases, but you can't really call them a solution for this market.
Rodkin cautions that some homeowners may never recover. He worries there could be another wave of foreclosures down the road.
I think if we watch the horizon, you can expect that there could be more foreclosures in some of those areas south of the city where home values have stayed so low, and where, you know, if I get a new job in Arizona, in Texas, I may just have to go.
Meanwhile, the services of the South Suburban Housing Center remain in high demand. Since Sanders started working there a year ago, the number of people looking for help has doubled, and he believes the foreclosure crisis is far from over.
I don't think that the first foreclosure crisis is over. Some of those families may have needed to be transitioned out of that home instead of being allowed to stay in that home.
The research company Realty Track says 1 in 4 homes with a mortgage in the Chicago area is seriously underwater. That means the owner owes at least 25% more than their property is worth. Now joining us to discuss this week's other big stories, our author Cheryl Jefferson, blogger Scott Smith, and Deborah Farmer, president and CEO of the communications firm, the Brown Farmer Group, and welcome everybody.
Good to be here.
So Mayor Emanuel is now throwing what might be called a Hail Mary pass, going to court to try to save the Lucas Museum here in Chicago. Deborah, is that a fight worth waging?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's very disheartening when you look at Melody Hobson and her commitment to Chicago. She's an ambassador for this city, and to be in this position to have to fight for this opportunity that will bring about jobs, it will bring about a new experience for inner city kids to visit this museum, I think it's a fight worth fighting for.
Well, the question is, though, why was there a fight in the first place? I mean, this is the second city where she and her husband, George Lucas, have chosen a site that they knew was going to be difficult. It's federal parkland at the Presidio. It's now protected lakefront land here in Chicago. So I think really it's, why isn't there another site that's more acceptable to them? Why is this the only site? If we want to bring folks who are from the south and west sides that really want to experience this, you know, cultural icon, why not choose a site that's maybe closer to them, you know, farther away?
The difference here may be that Lucas is putting in a lot of his own money, $740 million, in order to jumpstart this. It isn't, Mayor Emanuel said there's precedent. The Adler Planetarium was built by Max Adler, a rich Chicagoan back in the 30s. So should that make a difference that he's putting this kind of his own money in?
There are a lot of ways that this can work. The Lucas Museum should not be a financial Death Star for the city of Chicago, right? Lucas has deep pockets. The Disney company, which owns the Star Wars franchise, has deep pockets. And there are a lot of potentially very enthusiastic private investors who would love to be involved in a partnership around this. So there are a lot of ways it can work without reliance on public monies. And in terms of the actual land, for the museum to be located on the south side has huge benefits. It can form a bookend to the museum campus with the Museum of Science and Industry and the Obama Library, say in Jackson Park, and providing a huge magnet for jobs and opportunities and visitors and so forth. And Friends of the Parks, in terms of the site, Friends of the Parks has actually been an Obi-Wan Kenobi and a Yoda for their mission. They have used the Force for good to protect the magnificent lakefront that so identifies Chicago.
But the question is, what did they really protect, right? Did they just protect a parking lot?
Absolutely. That's my opinion. I actually live near the facility. The thoughts of having it there, I think it would be, you know, nice for the community. And I do believe that it's just a parking lot. I mean, when you talk about Friends of the Parks, when you look at this opportunity, again, to your point, to bring in inner city kids to this, you know, neighborhood, to have this experience, to, you know, be in a position to see the city in a different way, you know, why not? And I look at it as a parking lot.
I hear a lot about bringing kids from, you know, the south and west sides down to downtown, and I wish we would think more about bringing downtown to the south and west sides. I mean, the Friends of the Parks has been there for 40 years. It is an institution that protects the lakefront. I think it's more than just protecting a parking lot. It's actually protecting against business as usual. We've seen since the 2015 elections that people in Chicago aren't happy with the way that things always have been. I mean, I can't be the only person who was waiting for bulldozers to show up on the lakefront, because that's how we used to do things. And I'm glad we're talking about past that.
The Meigsfield destruction under Mayor Daley.
I mean, that's not a distant memory for a lot of people. And so I'm glad that we've actually moved past that, and we've thought about kind of different ways of tackling these things.
The mayor did propose a compromise. After the original lawsuit, he suggested tearing down the old McCormick Place and actually adding more parkland to the lakefront. Is that compromise a reasonable one? And did Friends of the Park blow it a little bit here?
Well, swapping a building for another building does not seem to be that big a stretch. It would seem that Friends of the Parks could accommodate, a compromise like that. But there are some interesting legal precedences regarding landfill and what is in the land and who does that belong to. If you just look at the history of Sue the T-Rex at the Field Museum, and it was the fact that the bones were in the land that called into play laws regarding land usage. And Friends of the Parks could use a very similar argument, even though it's just a parking lot.
Though the McCormick Place idea depended on over $1 billion of actual public funding,
Right.
it required a compromise in Springfield, and we haven't
Right.
seen a lot of compromise over Springfield in the last few months.
Last point here, Melody Hobson, who's of course a Chicago financier and the wife of George Lucas, said that, quote, this process has been co-opted and hijacked by a small special interest group. Does she have a point?
She has a very valid point. And I just go back to my original point. I think it's really disheartening that she's, provided so much, love to the city that she's from and so much support, and to be in a position like this, it's just heartbreaking. And I do think that, when you look at the bigger picture, it's not about her, her reaping the benefits. It's about her providing an opportunity for our city.
While we're talking about tourism, another development, Mayor Emanuel is proposing a tax on Airbnb rentals or rentals like Airbnb. 4% tax, says it would bring in about $2 million a year. And under the plan, this money would be used to move homeless, especially out of the viaducts on the north side, Foster and Wilson and those streets under Lakeshore Drive. Smart idea?
Well, the bureaucracy required to fix the problem is as complex as the problem. So it calls a lot of questions into play. For starters, is the amount of tax revenue that would be produced going to be enough to make a dent in the homeless problem in Chicago? What will be mechanisms are put in place to determine that that money is dedicated for that particular usage? We can take a lot of lessons from the Illinois lottery, and that money was supposed to be used for education,
yeah.
and there have been a lot of issues with that. So there are many lessons that need to be learned here.
I'm also thinking, Chicago needs to continue to be a place where startups and entrepreneurs can continue to thrive.
Sure.
However, when those startups get to a certain scale and they are actually having a really big impact on the larger economy, we need to make sure that they're contributing to the economy as well. I mean, revenue for a lot of the downtown hotels, individual rooms, has been down. I think it was something like 5%. And so that's because a lot of there are different ways that people are traveling. There are different ways that people are staying in the city of Chicago. I think that's great. People should create their own experiences here, but we need to make sure that those sort of alternate forms in the economy need to contribute to the larger environment as well, and need to make sure that we maintain a particular tax base.
What about the homeless end of that proposal? The pilot program to move about, I guess, 75 homeless people out beginning this summer.
I mean, I'm in agreement with it. I think when you think about bringing some sort of solutions to a big problem here in the city, you have to start somewhere. And when you think about, just in the capacity of driving through and what a sore sight it is to see, not only, these people that are in this, unfortunate situation, I think you really should try to provide some support to them. And I think this is a nice way to start.
Some skeptics, and of course there are skeptics of this, say that it's just a way to clear out undesirables before the festival season, and no one really worried about it over the winter.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the thing about homelessness is it's not just about a place to live. That is a temporary solution to a permanent problem. And so you need to make sure that there are job services. You need to make sure that they are connected to the neighborhood community in some way. Here's another example of trying to connect more of the neighborhoods to the prosperity that we see downtown. So that's really the solution of long-term homelessness solution. So a place to live is great, but we need to think beyond that.
Alderman Smith in Lincoln Park is worried that these rental places like Airbnb are actually buying up entire buildings, operating them like hotels, but they're not subject to the same regulations and taxes. Is this a question of fairness for Airbnb and the others?
They should definitely be subjected to the same kind of regulation, and part of that is the security issue. There is a shadow housing opportunity through Airbnb, for example, predators to find housing near schools, for illegal immigrants, for human trafficking issues. And in Europe, there have been instances where Airbnb has been suspected of kind of being a shadow housing haven for suspected terrorists. So there are many layers to the issue that really need to be addressed.
And I think in this licensing, it's 90 days and then you have to apply for that license. And 90 days is about a quarter of the year. So if that's what the home is being used for, then there is a pretty significant aspect of it being used as more of a rental property.
Let's move down to Springfield quickly. The commission that's studying medical marijuana, made up of doctors, nurses, and patients, is angry. They say that many of their recommendations are just summarily rejected by Governor Rauner. The latest include diabetes 1 and anxiety disorders. Rauner is saying, no, we need more study. What do you think?
I think compassion. You know, there needs to be a level of compassion Rauner needs to show in this instance here. When you think about the capacity that you're stepping into a position where you're providing relief for people, whether it be, you know, panic disorders or diabetes, and you're not considering, you know, the benefits of this providing a service to help people, there's no compassion there, and shame on Rauner.
Scott, we need to relax the rules?
Well, you have to wonder how many more fronts Governor Rauner can take in the various battles that he has going on throughout the state right now. I mean, this does seem like marijuana has been shown to alleviate a lot of chronic pain conditions, and I think we need to I tend to listen to my doctors. I think we need to listen to the doctors that are making these recommendations.
And should we expand the numbers? Beyond these two, diabetes and anxiety disorders, there are a whole host of other diseases for which people are proposing that marijuana be allowed.
Well, if we expand the base, the amount of taxable revenue might allow us to fund the Lucas Museum and to deal with homelessness on a more effective level.
Should we just give up the whole, what may be a facade of medical marijuana, and follow the lead of Colorado and Oregon and Washington states that say, you know, they tried the medical marijuana route and they gave up and said, look, let's just make it recreational because that's what most of the people use it for anyway?
Well, I mean, again, these are the kinds of things that we've gone throughout our history. You know, it used to be that we outlawed alcohol as well. I mean, I think we need to think about science. We need to be looking at the way in which what is best for the, you know, folks who need the most help in society, and that should really guide our thinking.
What about the Rauner argument that actually a lot more study is needed?
Well, how is he to determine that? You know, is he a medical doctor? I don't think that that's fair. Why would you say that, you know, you need to invest more study into this? When you look at, again, people who have gone to school, they have the studies to, you know, basically justify their, you know, solutions to a problem, he doesn't have the right, I don't think.
The board recommendations are along the lines of what other states have gone and done as well. So we're not actually like out there and being first in this instance.
Let's, speaking of tourism, there's another new proposal. Actually, it's not that new. The idea of gondolas along the Chicago River. A couple of years ago, 3 years ago, the tourism folks were promoting it as trams over the river, and now it's come back as gondolas. It looks kind of futuristic. What do we think about gondola? I guess they'd come from Navy Pier down to the river and then the river west.
Have at it. Fun. Have at it. I think it'll be a great experience for many.
You know, I'd love to see a plan that gets gondolas down to Pullman. You know, that's a national monument. It's endorsed by President Obama.
Nice.
Like, let's get some more folks down there and see the beauty and the history of that part of the city. I mean, I think we have plenty of ways to get around on Wacker Drive. We don't necessarily need gondolas over it. I'd like to see some, you know.
But honestly, do you think Pullman can compete with the lakefront and the museum district as a place for international tourists?
Absolutely. I think if we're going to take these big picture ideas that are allow for more of a conduit between downtown and Pullman. I've been there. It's beautiful down there. There's no reason why we can't think big like that for the South Side.
The cost, they're talking about $250 million to start.
Privately funded. And the emphasis on private funding, I think, could make this a very attractive proposal. And it's a very interesting aesthetic that, you know, the drawings that we have seen sort of reflect the shape of the bean, and they reflect a little bit of the, you know, the pavilions along the lakefront. It could be very, very impactful.
But who's going to ride between December and March? That's what I
will. You and I will. How about that?
I won't even ride in June and July. I'll take a razor scooter. I don't know, some other way to get around.
Maybe they can just serve champagne up there, you know, in the cold.
Well, now
I want to thank our guests very much.
Thank you.
Cheryl Jefferson, Scott Smith, and Deborah Farmer. Here in Chicago, we've seen how the Laquan McDonald shooting exposed a deep lack of trust between minority communities and police. So how do we improve that rocky relationship between white cops and black citizens? It can start with one encounter at a time. Here's Robin Robinson.
This Facebook post is where it all started. Chicagoan and motivational speaker Dwayne Bryant posted his reaction to a traffic stop with an Indiana state trooper, and within days it went viral. The post did not show Bryant being tased or beaten. Instead, it captured a moment of mutual respect.
So I was going 85 but didn't realize the speed limit had dropped to about a 60 miles per hour zone. So I look up and I see the police. And so he asked me for my license, registration. So when he ran my registration, before he ran it actually, he told me he can either give me a $500 ticket or he can take me to jail. I'm thinking, I don't want either one of those. I got work to do. So then he came back with a $150 ticket. So I said, you know what, officer, thank you very much. I really appreciate this. And I said, can I take a picture of you? And he asked, why would you take a picture? And I said, clearly, because I have some students. And they think that if a black guy gets stopped by a white police officer, it's going to be a fatality or something is going to go wrong. And I said, I just want to show them with proof that it doesn't have to go down that way. If you give respect, it's possible that you get respect back. So basically, after talking to him for a while, he took the ticket, he ripped it up, and he gave me a warning.
I've done in the past where, I've written tickets and, give people, breaks and give them a little, it's like, okay. But I mean, this one, it was just, he said everything like just right. And I mean, he said everything as far as like, it seems like he's not for himself. He's for kids. He's trying to help people. And I mean, that's what I do.
Since that encounter last year, The Stop, Bryant has been moving nonstop. He published a book about it and other encounters with authority. He's worked with several law enforcement agencies across the country looking to improve relations with their communities. Bryant would especially like to fix the fear, the perception of police by many minority youngsters.
If you're at the playground playing, doing nothing wrong, minding your own business, and if a police car drove over, what would you do? Yes.
I'm gonna run.
You're gonna run. Why would you run?
Because I feel like the police officer is trained to shoot.
The first time when I heard the students say I would run, I mean, when I sat there, I had to catch myself because I really got emotional. And I just thought, how many of my babies are gonna get shot in their backs because they're running?
And we are joined now by Dwayne Bryant to tell us a little bit more about where the journey that started out as a trip to Battle Creek has now taken you. The Stop becomes your first book.
Yes.
And now we could hardly get you on the program because you're in such demand. What has the response been?
It is fantastic, overwhelming, and incredible. I literally just got in last night at 1 o'clock this morning from South Florida, talking to young people about their responsibility, their roles when they have a police encounter. But it's not necessarily just about a police encounter. It's about life. Are you preparing yourself for life? Because those who are prepared make better decisions. Those who aren't make not so good decisions.
So we've already seen, what happened in the Stop. I would just like to point out that you are a motivational speaker.
Yes.
You have had, every time I've seen you over the years, you've had a big, that smile right there on your face. So your interaction with an officer who pulls you over, you are prepared to kind of charm your way through the situation. So is it fair to say that someone else could achieve a similar outcome? Maybe not get the warning instead of the ticket, but could have a good experience if that's not their personality?
I think it's fair to say that everyone can bring respect to the table. Everyone can bring personal responsibility to the table. Now, yes, I've been speaking in front of audiences for a long time, so I don't expect the average person to do that. However, the average person can remain calm. They can't put their hand on the steering wheel. They can't answer questions politely. They can't check themselves and their attitude at the door because a law enforcement officer is just trying to do their job most. And so therefore, why make it anything that it doesn't need to be? So yes, everyone can do it.
So several times in your book, you talk about your goal is to make it home safely. It does seem rather a tragedy that in many people's minds, the obstacle to making it home safely could actually be a police officer. That should be what helps you make it home safely. Do you see any recognition, in terms of, obviously, the Indiana State Police have embraced, you've been the best thing that happened to them since, I don't know, since the basketball title or something, But yeah, really, it's been great for them PR-wise, something that law enforcement needs as well. But isn't it kind of a tragedy that we have to worry about such things?
It is a tragedy, and it's a tragedy on both sides, honestly. It's a tragedy that you do have a small element of law enforcement who use excessive force, who dehumanize people, who do not see someone as an individual, as a human being, and they just automatically go in to arrest, to criminalize. And it's also unfortunate that some community members also, they see law enforcement, they think this pig, this cop, this, you know, whatever they think. So honestly, it's on both sides. And I think when I wrote this book, I wanted to be fair. I didn't want to blame police. I didn't want to blame community, but I wanted to say we all have a responsibility, not just in the stop, but in life, to be respectful. People are not respectful in general.
Well, but oftentimes people respond based on their own experience, or sometimes just based on what they've seen. You and I talk about how something negative seems to have a seems to be magnified.
Absolutely.
You know, if I have a complaint, I'm gonna call you. If I had a compliment, I might get around to telling you at some point. So you seem to be trying to magnify the positive, a compliment.
Yes.
And how is that? I mean, that's not usual.
Honestly, a lot of people think the book is just about an engagement with law enforcement.
But it's not.
It's really not.
No, it's not.
It's about restoring humanity. It's about understanding your purpose in life. It's about understanding what are you here for, and let's tune into that level of frequency, and then we can be able to create the life that we want.
Do you see the conversation changing at all? I know Chicago we're a flutter about the fact that you know, we've spent since 2004 $660 million settling lawsuits against police, but that doesn't. It hasn't changed anything, is what many critics would argue.
Correct.
Do you see at least a willingness to say we've got to try something new?
I think it has to, everyone knows you have to try something new. No one knows what the new is. This is not rocket science.
Well, if you body cameras, you know, citizen review boards, is that what it is? Is that going to capture the hearts and minds?
No. It's just now I'm going to videotape my crime. So if I don't like you and I dehumanize you now, I might think twice about it. But it don't necessarily stop me. If we don't get training, officers need to be trained. Community needs to be trained on what an officer's role. Community doesn't even, like people say, they didn't have to shoot that many times, but maybe they did. We don't even know the role of a police officer. So both sides need to come together, town hall meetings, school hall meetings, and have intelligent conversations where we're not trying to victimize each other or blame, but we're trying to understand.
As you look at this conversation, along with the conversation about mass incarceration, disproportionate incarceration of African Americans, it seems that we're at a fork in the road. Are people that used to say one thing to you, are they saying something else?
I think right now people are just, honestly, we don't know what to do. You are correct. There's a fork in the road. Which way do we go? Do we do the status quo, which is the easiest, most convenient, most comfortable thing to do, or do we challenge ourselves? The fork is everyone have to become self-aware. Law enforcement have to become self-aware. Their departments, their chief have to say, listen, this is the standard that we're going to operate with. Individuals have to become self-aware. We have to say, what is my personal standard for myself? And then from there, we engage in dialogue, because this is fixable. Right now, it is still fixable. It is solvable. A few years down the road, I don't know what it's going to look like. But honestly, when I wrote this book, it's like God gave me the power and the passion to write this thing in 40 days, the whole book.
Wow. All right. Thanks so much for joining us. Good luck on your journey. The book is The Stop by Dwayne Bryant.
Thanks, Robin. Well, that wraps up tonight's program. You are now in the loop. To learn more about our show, log on to wycc.org and click on In the Loop. And join us next week when we take a closer look at efforts to reform Illinois prisons. That's next week on In the Loop. Until then, for Robin Robinson, I'm Chris Bury.